Mm, Hello, Mr. Whittle. This is from Harley Gal. Says, what do you think the worst threat to America is besides Obama? Is it the Middle East, the UN, China? Uh, it's it's the lack of virtue in American culture. That's the greatest threat to America. The lack of virtue in American culture is the reason that Barack Obama is elected. It's the reason we have the kind of representatives we have. It's it's all of these things. Um, we are a government of people who are elected to who are supposed to be able to govern themselves. And when the fabric of American society gets so thin, when morality becomes so rare, and families fall apart, and there are no fathers to show young men how to be men and not be violent predators and all this other stuff, when all of this laziness and lack of moral decency and lack of education and lack of concern, this whole movement now, I don't know if you've been watching what these crazy nutty kids today, but they've got this expression they just love called swag. I don't need to go to school. I've got swag. I don't need to get a job. I've got swag. I don't need an education. I've got swag. I don't need to read. I've got swag. What is swag? Well, swag is swagger. It's attitude, man. As long as I got the attitude, as long as I got the swagger, I don't need any of that stuff. I just developed jaundice. Here's a white balance for you. Ta-da. And so what we've got is we've got immoral people, and we've got ignorant people. We got people who are not terrified of their ignorance. They should be terrified of their ignorance, but they're not. They're proud of it. And that puts us in enormous trouble, because the entire idea of our system of life is that we govern ourselves. And if we're not fit to govern ourselves, then other people will be more than willing to step up and govern us for ourselves. And we see that all the time. So every single time we see something where people are unwilling to accept the responsibility for their own freedom, then somebody else, usually somebody in government, is more than willing to step up and take that pesky freedom off of our shoulders in exchange for doing the job we should be doing for ourselves. Here's a little statistic that I think we mentioned after the election. This will make you feel good. 25, 30, 40 million conservatives set out the last two elections. And we got a hold of some, I don't want to call them internal polls, but some specific research that basically indicated that something like 20 million hardcore evangelical Christians, which are the most conservative people in the country, and other conservatives, some enormous number, something like 100 times the margin of victory, don't vote because they're not registered to vote. And when they ask these conservatives why they're not registered to vote, they say they don't want to vote because they don't want to register, rather because they don't want to be called for jury duty. Isn't that nice? Here we are supposed to be the people that are all about civic duty and civic responsibility, and conservatives don't register to vote because they don't want to get jury duty, because they have jobs and they have lives. I understand that. Jury duty is an incredible pain. But you go, it's your civic duty. And the ultimate irony is that the juror pool is not culled from voter registration. It's culled from driver's license pool. But 20 million people aren't registered to vote. Conservatives, they say they're not registered to vote because they don't want jury duty. And a lot of people, some significant portion of the NRA, 25, 30, 40%, is not registered to vote because they figure if they're registered to vote, and then the government will know who they are and where they live, and then they'll come and get their guns. My response to that is, if it ever gets to the point where they come and get your guns, they're going to come and get your guns with a tank. And the AR-15 is not terribly effective against a tank. The way you stop these people from getting your guns is you get involved in the political process and make sure these people don't have the votes to put the tanks on the road to get your guns. Look, I'm all about the Second Amendment, and I think that the Second Amendment is the last line of defense against tyranny. I have an AR-15 and a 45. And nevertheless, the idea that you can protect yourself from politics by getting out of politics should be proven by now to be a pretty bad idea. Most of us have spent 40, 50 years letting the left take over everything because we just, it's none of my business, I don't care. Well, You may not be interested in politics, but politics is interested in you, and politics is coming after you, and you can either get in this fight and win elections, or you can fall back on your weapons. Now, I have weapons to fall back on too. I'm not mocking this idea. On the contrary, I think the fact that we have weapons to fall back on is the only thing stopping these people from doing what they really want to do. But I am also telling you that if we let this government get to the place where it could get to, then small arms are not going to do the job. They're not going to do the job. We have got to get into the political fight and outvote these people while we still can. And the horror of it all is that the liberals turn out everybody they have, and we turn out half the people we have. And if we turned out 60% of the people we had, we'd never lose again. If we turned out all of the people we had, the liberalism would disappear from the culture because they would realize they're outnumbered. You know, the first thing that Lenin did when he tried to come to power in Russia was he named his political party the Bolsheviks. And the Bolsheviks in Russian means the majority party. They weren't the majority party. They were a sliver. They were a few, 10, 15, 20% of the population. But Lenin decided to name them the Bolsheviks. And so everybody said, oh, they're the majority party. They're the party that everybody belongs to. This is what the liberals have done here. The liberals have taken over the media. They've taken over the culture. And 10% or 15% of the population sets the tone for the rest of the country and makes every single one of the majority feel that we're a minority in our own country. And I'm getting comments from my live stream here saying that the military still has honor. Of course they have honor. And of course huge numbers of the military would not fire on people who are legally owning firearms. I have no doubt that the military would just simply, largely en masse, refuse to obey that order, but some of them would. And then you start having to ask yourself about things like Homeland Security, and apparently, I don't know how much of this is crazed, conspiracy theories, but I've heard fairly reliable reports that the Homeland Security Department has ordered 850 million rounds of hollow point ammunition. The Homeland Security Department. You know, Obama talked during his first election campaign about a civilian army that would be as well armed as the U.S. military. I don't fear the military because only of the quality of the people in the military. But these paramilitary organizations, these new things, you know, and I don't know. Look, our entire purpose of doing this show and my entire job as a pundit and all the things I do is not to say it's crazy to keep guns. On the contrary, it's the smartest thing we can do is keep ourselves armed. It's the best deterrent we have against this kind of government overreach. But my entire job as a persuader is to try to get people to make a change politically before we get to the point where we have to use these things. I don't ever want to see those guns used. I'm glad they're there, and I think like every one of you who owns your own guns, I'm pretty much mentally preparing myself and have prepared myself for the day when I may have to do it. But for God's sakes, can we all agree that this would be a catastrophe and we need to do everything other than that? So why don't we just get out and vote? Because here's the thing. The Stockholm syndrome that the culture drives into your head. Oh, look, I got sick again. The culture drives into your head the idea that progressivism is inevitable, that the liberals will always win, that it's a giant ratchet, that once Obamacare is in place, you can't undo it, and all this other nonsense. It's just not true. We've voted down constitutional amendments before. We can vote down anything. We can vote Obamacare out the door. All we have to do is just go out and vote. And if we were outnumbered 2-1 or 3-1, I'd say we've got such a big uphill neighborhood to fight. But we don't. We outnumber these people 2-1. 4 people identify themselves as conservatives, 3 as independents, and 2 as liberals. We just have to show up, but we don't. So now my job and your job and everybody else's job is to convince people to show up. Now, to be fair, a lot of conservatives don't show up because a lot of conservatives don't feel like there are any conservative candidates out there. That's happened twice in a row now. And we are going to crack open this virtual presidency in January, and I'm going to show people what a conservative candidate sounds like so that the real conservative candidates can at least get some kind of idea, and maybe they'll pay attention and figure out how to sell some of these ideas, because as ideas damn near sell themselves. So, Harley Gal, I think the biggest threat to America is the quality of the American people's moral virtue. I think that's all of it. I wouldn't worry. I think our position in the rest of the world is superb, actually, strangely enough. Things are horrible here. They just happen to be worse everywhere else. If this were a giant game of Risk and all of these countries were on the board and I had first pick, I'd take America instantly. I wouldn't take China, I wouldn't take Russia, I wouldn't take any. I'd take America instantly. So anyway, we're running out of time.